Hello! You're watching the development blog for Shokin, a multi-platform waitlist management tool soon to be available on Android and iOS. This is week 53 of development. We have officially crossed the 1-year mark. The current status is the Android and iOS alpha testing versions of those apps are ready for download on their respective app stores. However, the apps are no longer ready for testing. And this is for the reason I will explain in just a second. Last week, the goal was to polish up the apps and make them even better in terms of user experience for the testers. However, that was derailed. And this is also the reason why the apps are no longer ready for testing. For a little bit of background, the app before 2 weeks ago, would send email notifications to guests who join and to guests who are ready to be seated or ready to be invited in for service and stuff like that. In other words, email notification was the primary way that the host or whoever using this app would be communicating with the guests. We ran into an issue with some of the testers with all the testers, that the emails that the app would send would land directly in the guest's spam box. This is for a very simple reason. The domain that I'm using for this app to send emails does not really have any reputation in terms of spam, and as a result, most of the email services would immediately filter the messages from this domain out to spam inbox. Now, to be fair, the app, I foresaw this and I have implemented messaging in the app to warn the hosts to advise their guests to check the spam box. But the thing is, you can't really rely on that. Either the host would forget to comply with the request in the app or just simply would not read it in the first place. And the bad user experience would then be your fault, the developer's fault, and not necessarily the user's fault. So you have to guard against that. And as a result, I've made the decision to switch the entire notification system from email to SMS. SMSs are, there's no spam box for SMS in the same way that emails do. So deliverability can be much better guaranteed when you're sending stuff on SMS. So last week, the goal was to investigate SMS implementation, and then, if it is not too complicated, actually finish implementation. It turned out to be far more interesting and complicated than I originally anticipated. The biggest reason is that telecom, as well as the service providers for SMS messaging systems, are this industry is a heavily regulated industry, and as a result, there's a lot of red tape in it. And it turns out that I need to go through those hoops before I can even begin sending SMS messages using a backend service to the guests. And it's been an eye-opening and interesting experience. This is probably the very first compliance experience that I have with regards to the services that I wish to provide in my app. To send SMS messages, you have to understand that you have 3 options in terms of the origin. You can use a 10-digit DLC phone number. These are the phone numbers that you and I are very familiar with. They got an area code and then 3-digit followed by 4-digit. So it's a 10-digit DLC phone number. You have the option of sending from a toll-free number, the 800 number, any number that starts with an 8. I'm not going to make a categorical claim, but that's what you and I are familiar with. Used to be just for toll-free phone calls, but now they're used for sort of a big brand. If a number comes from 8-something, you know that they're more or less legit. That's your second option. The third option is a short code. A short code is one of those phone numbers where when you receive the text message from the short code, you see that the origin phone number is like a 5-digit number, 65535 or something like that. This is a short code. And for my app, I investigated all those options. It turns out that there's really only one option for me. The 10-digit DLC, one of the biggest concerns with the regulators with regards to the 10-digit DLC sending SMS is spam. In other words, you can impersonate on a 10-digit DLC because it's got an area code, it's got everything. It looks like a real phone number, not from a company, not from an organization. And as a result, in order to send text messages from an SMS, text messages from a 10-digit DLC to any guest, you'd have to apply and verify the purpose of your messages. And they call them campaigns. And there are a couple of issues with those campaigns. Number one, the throughput is very, very low. So if you're operating as a sole proprietorship, which I was doing, you are limited to anywhere between 3,000 to 6,000 messages per day. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but for the purpose of this app, that's a pittance. If you consider per guest, they would receive 3 notifications, 1 welcome, 1 calling, and 1 dismissal. 3,000 to 6,000 messages a day would equate to about 1,000 to 2,000 guests a day. And that won't serve many places before I would exhaust my messages. And the other thing is that they rate limit you. I believe they rate limit you to 30 or 60 messages per minute, something like that. In other words, if there's a busy period of time and a lot of the users from my app would send a lot of messages in any given time, I might get rate limited and their guests wouldn't receive SMS notifications. That's a big problem. So this is not really appropriate. The second problem is perhaps a more compliance problem. The 10-digit DLC requires that you have a campaign for every sender. What that means is that if one of my users signs up for my service, I'd have to go through the compliance situation with the user to enable my app to send messages on their behalf. And every single user would require 1 campaign. That's 1 application, 1 coordinated effort to make this app legal, if you will, for the users that would use my app. This is just not practical. The goal from my particular app is low friction. If you're a business, you want notifications, you sign up, you tap a button to sign in, and then you can start using it immediately. For you to give us a call and try to sign up, and then it won't work. I don't have the throughput for that, and then I doubt that the businesses would actually have the patience for that. So this is really not something that I'm looking to do. So in other words, 10-digit DLC, that option is out. I love to use shortcodes to send SMS for my app. The problem with shortcode is that, well, before I dive into the problems, I have to say that shortcodes are great. Number one, there's no doubt that you're sending the shortcode as an organization. So there's less compliance with regards to approving your campaigns by the authorities. The second thing is that I don't have to have, because there's no campaign approval, I don't have to get each and every single one of my users to sign up for a campaign and go through the compliance exercise with them. And the third thing is that they allow for massive throughput. You can send thousands of messages per second. So realistically, I would never run into rate limit issues. Problem with shortcodes is that they're really expensive. For a phone number that I can rent from my upstream service provider, you're looking at least $1,000 a month before sending messages. Maybe one day this is how I'm going to flex. Oh, I have a short code all to myself. But today's not that day. So short code is out too. That leaves us only with the option of toll-free numbers, the 800 numbers, any number that would start with the digit 8. This seems to be a sweet spot for my situation. It allows for lower throughput than shortcodes, but it's still significantly higher than the 10-digit DLCs can achieve. In addition to that, because it's a toll-free number, the users would know that it's from an organization and not from another person, and as a result, there is much less compliance requirement with regards to signing up for campaigns and stuff. I don't have to do that. I just have to verify myself as an organization. And that's the problem. I have to verify myself as an organization. At the beginning of my app journey, I had intended to not use a legal entity, just use my natural person as the operating entity. In other words, I'm not forming a company. I'm just person writing an app, submitting to the App Store, and then hope that people would use it. And if it ever catches any attention or gains any traction, sure, I'll consider perhaps setting up a legal entity, because setting up a legal entity costs money, and every year you'd have to pay for your company to stay open. And at this point, I have no option, because for me to have an 800 number, a toll-free number, I have to sign up to be an entity. And that's what I did today. Today is January 2nd, and I submitted my application to form a business to my state. And in a day or two, well, today's Friday, so it's going to be next week. Next week, ideally, I would receive my formation confirmation. And after that, I'd have to, there's a lot of business-related side of things that I have to deal with for this to even begin working. So the entire last week and this week going forward would have to be dedicated to business formation, setting everything up, keeping myself in compliance, and then making myself eligible for the toll-free number application. So I think what's going to happen next week is that after the business formation is approved, I will apply for an EIN, employer identification number. After that, I'll use that to apply for DONS number. And with those two numbers, then I can apply for the capability of receiving and renting a toll-free number to send SMS. So hopefully next week, that's the goal. Well, that is the goal for next week, and hopefully I can accomplish those goals for next week. And after that, I can proceed with the app and then setting up the SMS to send users and guests notifications instead of relying on email. And as a result, I'm actually discontinuing my upstream service provider for resend. I don't foresee myself using email services anymore. So a very interesting turn of events. My hands were forced, and I am having to do that. But, it's an interesting experience, and I look forward to doing it. That's it for this week. I'll see you next week.